Hello. This is 27 January 2026. My name is Pete, and this is another episode in my continuing journey to find recovery. I speak like this because I have aphasia, word finding problems, problems with my flow, all the things I was so particularly perceptive of in my past life before suffering a traumatic brain injury after an assault at the hospital where I had worked. I tried to speak slowly so I don't just stumble and go off in different directions. And I can get a little intense or loud or pressured. It helps me focus, and there are certain topics and issues I will absolutely wake up and become a bit more animated. I think about my own struggles and how for 16 months I have been in really bad shape ever since miraculously waking up after being extubated, after being on a ventilator in a medically induced coma with pneumonia, whatever, for 14 days. The point is, there are so many things about me that have changed. And there is also something inside of me, like a subconscious thing. I push myself to not just try to roll up in the blankets and binge TV and pass time away. I cannot do that. I actually wonder why that is. Because I am in some ways a psychosocial expeditioner doing my own internal post-incident review special case conference. But the patient involved in this post-incident review is the same as the review board. It is all me. So what I have learned, without a shadow of a doubt, is that my past self as a neurodivergent psychiatric nurse clinician for 38 years, I was able to do what I did and achieve the things I did accomplish because as a kid growing up with ADHD and then inattentive type and type 2 major depression, the way I managed to do the things I did in life was by becoming an expert in wearing a mask. I had developed a flawless ability to separate what I thought and obsessed about from what I said and did or what my behavior would say about me. In other words, I was particularly obsessive that nothing I said would not match what I did. It was all a unified message and purposeful. In other words, to a degree, I was a form of a behavioral analyst, and I was intrigued by forensics. Throughout music, with an independent label and building studios, I wanted to be a forensic audio frequency analysis. But it was always about communication, the different possible modes of communication, or the message to be found in between the message. In other words, what wasn't said, there might be something else for me to perceive and to learn. And so that carried through ham radio after 9/11, becoming a general class amateur radio operator and helping build the first of its kind ham radio emergency communication station at the hospital where I worked and where I was disabled. All of those things had to do with communication in its many different ways. Granted, towers coming down or Sandy or communications disrupted, emergency communications appealed to me because once I had experienced it personally and then went out and learned what to do just in case it happens again, there was a degree of comfort I took in that. Plus, there was something else also. Community. In the ham radio, amateur radio, no matter what group of people, the organizations on Staten Island, to help with crowd control and marathons and events, but in case of emergency, community members got together, used their skills and new skills we would all learn to be helpful if the moment ever came. But the idea that people would merge all these skills and volunteer to pay it forward. I learned so much about ham radio from retired Navy operators who were old school and knew how to solder and build and Morse, and they all knew all this. So it was fascinating. But what I was doing was joining different communities. And as a volunteer with the ambulance or whatever I did, they were various communities. Healthcare was a community. People who work in healthcare, all aspects. That was a big part of my entire community and my entire life. My wife would admit that has a bearing on my life since we met working in the psychiatric emergency room. But I've learned community matters so much and has so much strength and resilience. I learned that long ago, but now it's needed more than ever because I know what it's like to be against the ropes. I know things I didn't know prior to 16 months ago. I have felt feelings, I have thought, I have things I have experienced in my head that I truly would not want for anyone, anywhere. I am not what some might assume. So that is one of the topics I have considered at depth and I wish and will speak about. So in other words, it seems to me assumptions are very connected to discrimination, thereby racism, all sorts of things, a domino effect. So in my war against assumptions, I will ask, look at me. If you never knew me, you're not a family member or whatever, you're just seeing me rambling on this video. What do you see? I am a 59-year-old, married, disabled, healthcare professional from Staten Island, New York, third generation. I only speak English, unfortunately, not even that well since a traumatic brain injury with aphasia. But I ask these things because if you look at me and you assume, oh, he's just a older Staten Island, and I do know Staten Island has a reputation aside from great pizza. I can speak dialects of English, very Staten Islandese should I need to, want to, but I don't need to. The thing is, what I have learned about communication is that until you learn how to do it properly and effectively, life is a mess. So when I ask, look at me, who do you see? What do you assume I am or stand for? I do that for the purpose of telling you, if you wonder something or assume things about me or anyone else, it is a lot of wasted cognitive and mental energy. Where, in my mind, the easier way to go about that is ask me. What I've learned about communication is that when it's without bias or judgment, it can be a very effective way to do everything, to express yourself, to demonstrate decency and integrity and show someone you care. But all of that starts in one place, with yourself. I say that because I had learned a very long time ago about many different aspects of therapy models, and I was very involved in learning everything related to mental health care. And I do know communication starts with yourself, because since I have had a traumatic brain injury and woke up from a coma after being extubated, and thank you to the Northwell SICU staff for saving my life. But I know my own internal monologue has gone through different phases. At first, for the first few months, as a person might think to themselves, oh, this is scary. Now, because my limbic system or emotional brain, under the pressure, I believe, of 3 hemorrhagic strokes, brain bleeds, in other words, there was nothing there. There was no internal monologue, because no memories, no fears based on past trauma or memory or projection of, oh no, this is that. There was no comparative fear or anxiety with me, because there was nothing. It was wiped clean. But there was also no internal monologue, no sense of self. So at first, I think a subconscious part of myself, not aware it was me, because there was no me, was dropping little words to save me. Because being so confused and lost and fearful, but not able to show it, because emotional capability offline, facial affect offline, so blunted and constricted. But so that internal monologue words, you're not that big a deal, you're not that important. In other words, don't get paranoid, that everyone's looking at you like, wow, because you don't remember anything, and you're confused, and that's embarrassing, So maybe those were just words because I practically memorized the DSM-5 and I used to work in informatics, but my obsessive way about me, things I wanted to be able to learn, complete, and teach, because that was involved with me learning. When I was responsible to teach something, you better believe I would be proficient at it. Not for any employer, because really, I was middle management. I wasn't a career climber. I was where I was going to be, and I was okay with that. But I did it because, one, I was a very, very obsessive, internal, focused, sensitive, but you would never have known it if you had been around me or worked with me. But the things I really, really learned, I was involved with sharing and teaching, and always it had something to do with my peers. Words matter, but they mattered so much to me a few months after waking up from a coma, when I was so blank and confused and frightened, and I was very mixed up from some things that had happened to me in different facilities. So, the little words to keep me from getting too paranoid, or to keep me at bay or calm me down a little tiny bit, went from helpful to hurtful. Now, because I have used acting and role playing to such a degree in the past to teach and learn, I don't know if that's the right words, but in other words, let me describe, put it out there to be on the same page so it makes sense what I'm saying. Now, here's the scenario. It's any random day. You wake up, look around, and here's the setup. Everything you know, everything you know in your heart is wrong. It's wrong. You begin to believe you have somehow broken reality, therefore condemning everyone. I tore myself to pieces in my head. I watched myself burn hundreds of times. Things so horrific. Because I felt so guilty for continuing to suffer and exist. And I was telling myself I had absolutely no right to exist. Yet, months I stood in a dark room with searing pain, unbelievable dysautonomia, myelopathy, everything. The point is, I would stand days and nights on end in dark rooms alone, because my head and back and neck and everything was exploding with pain. And migraines, I've not watched TV in 2 years, but the point is, I took it because I deserved it. Because that is what you do when you are God's disgrace. All of that built up inside of me. The stunning, unrateable amounts of pain everywhere. Neurophysical, psychological, everything, every extreme of loss, pain, and trauma. Every extreme that, as a past registered nurse, would be not rateable by any type of scale. But I didn't just put up with it because I was sad or because I was even tough. I was taking it because I somehow believed in my head that if I stood until my heart stopped or I had a forced stroke or whatever, if I took it all, I would somehow be helping humanity survive. As if there was some sort of demonic invasion and I was to be the sacrifice. I saw that scenario play out so many times in my head. It didn't frighten me. I was never going to complete suicide. And I have made that clear. I was a suicide prevention instructor for a long time, harm reduction, a mandated reporter, which I suppose I still am. And that all continues. I was waiting to die because alternatively, besides the spirituality catastrophe, my brain is floating away. This is what happens to me 16 months after a traumatic brain injury with post-concussion syndrome, myelopathy, dysautonomia. Those haven't been officially diagnosed or addressed yet, but whatever neurological impairment, dysregulation, whatever neurodegenerative issues are occurring, I do not know. There is no science to point me in any direction. So I can go only by symptomatology, my own. As I add this to my documents for my one-man psychosocial expedition case study, which in actuality I am writing a book. A book that I remember the day I decided I was going to write a book. And because of such severe hippocampus or amygdala, whatever the damage in that limbic system, I am so forgetful. I will record things and write things and forget within hours I've done it. So I will forget I'm even saying this. So me, if you're watching this, you wrote your book twice already. No more. Now chill out, have surgery in 4 days and get on with life. Get recovery. It's my 51st date's way of sending myself messages. Because we all need to stay the course and hold on tight and learn to make ourselves vulnerable when we need to. Because in a perfect world, there are people who are compassionate and decent and have integrity. But everyone is different. This I know. And some have not learned to control their internal monologue some are so angry or fearful about anything in particular that it allows a window for others to swoop in and replace thoughts and ideas with false narratives. That may be a form of marketing, but I see it as manipulation and cruel, because sometimes actions have consequences. And we are seeing so many negative consequences play out right now. But I will say something, and I do not say anything for no reason. I do not just ramble. I am not impulsive, thankfully. And my expectations for even being here recording this right now, someone might think, what's he want? Maybe he's trying to be get endorsement, or maybe he wants to be an influencer, maybe he's got a lawsuit. I have no lawyer, I have no lawsuit, nor am I on anyone's payroll. I have nothing to preach or sell or beg for. I have no secrets in my life. I am so very real and authentic, probably uncomfortably so for some people that knew me before. But I also have the insight to know that not everyone needs to know everything, and I do not want to be provocative or any of those rudimentary childish behaviors that many normies have, that the average. It seems to be, in terms of communities, and in terms of communities I belong to, with the newest, second newest, being people who have had a traumatic brain injury or from medical causes or whatever reason for a neurodegenerative brain disorder. I am new to that one, and what I didn't know about brain injuries before, even after 38 years as a registered nurse, granted I didn't work in neurology, but I did a year in ER, but I knew a lot about anatomy and physiology, and I was fascinated by neurology my entire life. What I didn't know about a traumatic brain injury as a nurse, as a geek who loved anatomy, what I didn't know was everything. I really had no idea. I mean, in terms of cranial pressure, of craniotomies, you keep a person alive, you stabilize them, and hats off to the people in the ICU who saved my life. They're brilliant, and I have tremendous honor and respect for them. But then you go home, go to rehab, and poof, you're back in life, and everything's okay. Wow, that was an assumption that has proven to be so very wrong. But I lived by experience. And the thing about having lived experience is that once you've got it, what do you do with it? So here's what I am intending to do with my lived experience. First, I am going to survive, have surgery in 3-4 days, and somehow knock it down to 120 pounds. Anyway, 2, I will share things with others. Anyone curious or wants to learn or hear my experience or my story, I'm not giving advice, or I will share, because there are communities of people who have been so far up against the ropes, who have lost lots of their identity and suffer with loss of physical body, all those things. Extreme illnesses and suffering change a person. Coming to the edge between a world of the living and the dead, that definitely changes a person. But to appreciate every moment, good or bad, to learn how to be present and not be obsessed about a career or health or finance or retirement, all the things I once was, and plagued by childhood and earlier fears or traumas or things in life. So in a way, having most of me as a tabula rasa cleared out right there on the 4th floor of that hospital, it does give me a chance to come in with a clear slate. As frightening and sad as that makes me, and I cry all day about that, it allows me to be so aware of things I was never aware of before. Together with my near-death experience, I have a level of awareness that is shocking, intriguing. I am different, not just less, because I told that to some talented journalists at one point. I was being accurate. I am a lot less. I am not employable. I cannot even swallow Ensure right now. So I'm participating in no hobbies, or I'm just trying to survive and crying and suffering. Yeah. But what I am doing and will do more of after surgery is interact and continue to re-access memories and cognitive strengths, things I was once interested in, computers and audio and art, as forms of recovery, tools for recovery. Humor. I have always known humor has a tremendous therapeutic value. It's proven to be a bit of a lifesaver for me. So that I will share. Some might not find me too funny when I get into my thing for Stand Up for Mental Health, but I have been on both sides of the psychiatric counter, and I have experienced other extremes as I've gone wafting through the DSM experientially. Oh, wow, Jesus, I'm sick of these things. Oh, wow. I am grateful to be here, to be awake, to be alert, and to be alive. In a lot of ways, I have everything I need right now. My journey continues, as does anyone else possibly watching this crazily long video, which I should delete it and just make 30 more and forget. The journeys continue because they must, and hope survives because it must. And if you are a healthcare professional or a veteran of any branch of the military, or a person living with a chronic mental illness or a neurodegenerative disease, or you are a person in another marginalized and vulnerable community, the LGBTQ plus community, know this: I will make it, and you will too. In closing, for now, I'm a queer militant with brain damage, but try and stop me. Good night.